Struggling woman helps a stranger fix his bike, unaware he was a Hell's Angel. The late hour and dead silence pressed in, amplifying every thought. Maggie slumped back against the seat, the car responding with only a weak sputter. "No signal," glowed stubbornly on her phone screen. The moon hung high, a cold silver disk that did little to dispel the blackness surrounding the woods. It had been exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 15 days since David had passed. His absence was a crushing weight in the silent car. "I miss you," she whispered into the quiet, the words hanging unanswered. 9:47 p.m. She hadn't seen another car in 40 minutes. The quiet was too loud, making memories rise up. David's laugh, his hand in hers, the way he'd always kiss her forehead. Memories that now only reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she lacked. A cloud drifted across the moon, dimming its light. The shadows deepened, making the night feel even more isolating. She'd driven right off the map into some forgotten corner where help would never come. Maggie blinked away the familiar sting of tears. Crying wouldn't start the car or bring back her husband. It wouldn't make the night any less dark or the road any less empty. She leaned her head against the headrest, feeling utterly alone, when a sound finally broke the silence, not the tick of the cooling engine, but a low, rhythmic thump coming from somewhere deep in the woods, off the road. It was too deliberate to be an animal, too faint to be a vehicle. It sounded like something heavy, perhaps something large, being dragged across the forest floor. The sound was slow, steady, and drawing closer. The chill Maggie felt was no longer just from the temperature. It was the sharp edge of primal fear. She gripped the car keys again, but this time, not to start the engine. She was no longer alone on this deserted road. A distant rumble broke through the silence of the night, growing louder with each passing second. Maggie's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she peered through her windshield, squinting at the approaching headlight. The motorcycle's beam cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating patches of the empty road ahead. The bike slowed as it neared her car, its engine dropping to a low purr. The rider was a large man, his broad shoulders covered in weathered leather that had seen better days. He brought his motorcycle to a stop just ahead of her car, the red taillight casting an eerie glow in the darkness. Maggie's heart quickened. Out here, miles from anywhere, a stranger could mean help or trouble. She watched as he switched off his engine and swung his leg over the bike. Even in the dim light, she could see he moved with a quiet confidence. He approached her car slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. Maggie's finger hovered over the window control, her mind racing between her need for help and her natural caution. Something in his unhurried movements made her pause. Despite his intimidating size and rough appearance, there was a steadiness about him that felt oddly comforting. "Car trouble?" His voice was deep and gravelly, but not unkind. After a moment's hesitation, Maggie lowered her window halfway. "Yes," she admitted. "It just died on me. Mind if I take a look?" He kept his distance, respecting her space. "Name's Sam. Truth is, my bike's giving me some trouble too. Could use a break from fighting with it." Maggie studied him in the dim light. His face was lined and weathered, but his eyes were clear and direct. "I'm Maggie," she said finally. "And, yes, I could use some help." She popped the hood, and Sam walked around to the front of the car. The hood creaked as he lifted it, and the sound seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. Maggie got out of the car, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. "Might be the alternator," Sam said, leaning in with a small flashlight he'd pulled from his pocket. "When's the last time you had it checked?" I'm not sure," Maggie admitted. "My husband used to handle all that." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt that familiar ache in her chest. Sam just nodded, continuing his inspection without pressing for more details. His hands moved with practiced ease over the engine, checking connections and components. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. "Here's your problem," he said after a few minutes, pointing to a loose cable. "Battery connections come undone. Simple fix." Maggie moved closer, watching as his steady hands worked to secure the connection. There was something calming about his methodical approach, the way he seemed to know exactly what needed doing. It was a stark contrast to her own scattered nerves. "Thank you," she said softly. "I was starting to think I'd be stuck out here all night." Sam straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "We all need a helping hand sometimes." He gave a small shrug. "Now, if you wouldn't mind returning the favor, I could use a second pair of eyes on my bike. Something's not right with the timing, but it's hard to diagnose alone." Sam crouched next to his motorcycle, his weathered hands moving with practiced ease over the engine. The moonlight caught the chrome details of the bike, casting silvery reflections across his focused face. He nodded to himself, a quiet certainty in his movements. "Looks like it's just the fuel line," he said, his voice gravelly but gentle. "Nothing too serious." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, the night air growing cooler. She watched as Sam methodically checked each part of the motorcycle, his fingers tracing along tubes and connections with the familiarity of someone who had done this countless times before. "Can I help?" she asked, surprising herself with the offer. "I mean, I don't know much about motorcycles, but maybe I could hold something or—" She let the sentence trail off, suddenly, unsure. Sam looked up at her, his eyes softening slightly. "Sure," he said, shifting to make room beside him. "Could use an extra pair of hands, actually." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small toolkit. Maggie knelt beside him, careful to keep her balance on the uneven ground. The smell of oil and leather mixed with the crisp night air. Sam handed her a flashlight and showed her where to aim it. "Just keep it steady there," he instructed, pointing to a spot near the engine. "That's perfect." As they worked together, the silence between them gradually became more comfortable. Sam explained each step in simple terms, his patience evident in his quiet instruction. The task gave Maggie's hands something to do, something to focus on besides the constant ache of loneliness she'd been carrying. "My husband used to work on cars," she said softly, surprising herself again by breaking the silence. "He loved it. Could fix almost anything." She paused, swallowing hard. "Been about a year since he passed. Cancer." Sam's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "I'm sorry," he said simply, but the words carried genuine weight. "Some days are harder than others," Maggie continued, adjusting the flashlight beam. "Tonight? Well, getting stranded out here, it just reminded me how alone I've been feeling." Sam nodded, reaching for a wrench. "Been on the road myself for years now," he offered, his voice low. "Sometimes alone is easier. Sometimes it's not." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the metallic clink of tools and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Sam didn't elaborate on his past, and Maggie didn't ask. There was something comforting about the simple act of helping, of being useful. The repair progressed steadily under Sam's capable hands. As they worked together, Maggie felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. There was something almost meditative about the routine of holding the light, passing tools, following Sam's quiet instructions. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about the empty house waiting for her, or the weight of memories that seemed to fill every room. Instead, she was just here, in this moment, doing something tangible, something helpful. When Sam finally straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag, the motorcycle's problem had been fixed. Maggie realized she felt different somehow. lighter, as if helping to repair this stranger's bike had repaired something small inside her too. "Thank you," she said, dusting off her knees as she stood. "For letting me help." Sam nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Thanks for the extra hands," he replied quietly. The night air grew heavy as the distant rumble of motorcycles shattered the peaceful silence. Maggie, still holding a wrench from helping Sam, glanced in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the approaching headlights, not one, but several motorcycles heading their way. "Sam?" she called out softly, her voice barely audible over the growing roar. Sam straightened up from his crouched position by his bike, his shoulders tensing. The peaceful expression he'd worn while working on his motorcycle vanished, replaced by something harder, more guarded. He didn't answer her, but his reaction told her everything she needed to know. Something wasn't right. The group of motorcycles surrounded them in a wide circle, their engines growling like hungry predators. Maggie counted 6 riders, all of them large men wearing leather jackets covered in patches and insignias. Their bikes gleamed menacingly in the moonlight, chrome pipes reflecting the dim glow of her car's headlights. One rider, bigger than the rest, cut his engine first. The others followed suit, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the tick-tick-tick of cooling engines. The leader swung his leg over his bike with practiced ease, his movements deliberate and threatening. Even in the dim, light, Maggie could see the tattoos that crept up his neck like dark vines. "Well, well," the man said, his voice rough and cruel. "Look who we found." He walked toward them with the confidence of someone used to being feared. His eyes locked onto Sam, ignoring Maggie completely. Sam shifted his weight, positioning himself slightly between Maggie and the approaching man. "Jax," he said, his voice flat and cold. So different from the gentle tone he'd used with her earlier. The other bikers dismounted, creating a tighter circle around them. Maggie felt her chest tighten as the reality of their situation became clear. They were trapped. Her fingers clutched the wrench tighter, though she knew it would offer little protection against these men. Jax stopped a few feet away, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Didn't expect to find you playing mechanic on the side of the road." His lips curled into a cruel smile, especially not with. His eyes finally slid to Maggie, dismissive and cold. Such interesting company. Sam's jaw clenched. He kept his eyes focused on a point just past Jax's shoulder, refusing to meet his gaze directly. The tension between the two men crackled like electricity in the air. Maggie watched as Sam's hands curled into fists at his sides, his knuckles white with strain. "This isn't what you think, Jax," Sam said, his voice low and controlled. Jax barked out a harsh laugh that made Maggie flinch. "No? Then why don't you tell me what it is?" He took another step forward, invading Sam's personal space. "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you're getting awful comfortable out here, maybe forgetting where you came from, who you really are." The other bikers shifted restlessly, their leather creaking in the darkness. Maggie's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The way these men carried themselves, the patches on their jackets, the obvious history between Sam and Jax, it all pointed to something dangerous, something she'd only seen in movies or read about in newspapers. "I haven't forgotten anything," Sam replied, each word carefully measured. But Maggie could hear the strain in his voice, could see the way his shoulders had hunched slightly, as if bearing an invisible weight. Jax's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "That's good to hear. Because you know what they say." He glanced at his fellow riders before fixing Sam with a predatory stare. "Once you're in for life." Jax's boots crunched on the gravel as he stepped closer to Sam. His leather vest, adorned with the hellsangels patches, seemed to absorb what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. The other bikers remained on their motorcycles, their engines idling with a low rumble that made Maggie's chest tighten. "Well, well," Jax drawled, his voice carrying an edge that made Maggie's skin crawl. "Look who we found running around in the dark." His eyes never left Sam's face, studying him like a predator sizing up its prey. Sam stood perfectly still, his shoulders tense. The easy manner he'd shown while working on the bike had vanished, replaced by something harder, more guarded. His hands, which had been so steady with the tools earlier, now clenched into tight fists at his sides. "It's been, what, 3 years?" Jax continued, taking another step forward. 3 years since you turned your back on your brothers?" The word brothers came out like a curse. Maggie watched the scene unfold from beside her car, her heart hammering against her ribs. The kind stranger who had stopped to help her was transforming before her eyes, revealing layers she hadn't glimpsed before. "Come on, Sam." Jax's voice dropped lower, almost friendly, but the threat beneath was unmistakable. "You know how this works. The club needs you back. We need our enforcer." Sam's jaw tightened at the word enforcer. His eyes darted briefly to Maggie, and she saw something like shame cross his features before. He looked away. "I'm done with that life, Jax." Sam finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. "You know that." The other bikers revved their engines in response, the sound echoing off the empty road like a warning. Maggie jumped at the noise, and Sam shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the gang. Jax's face hardened, all pretense of friendliness vanishing. "Nobody's ever done with the life, Sam. You of all people should know that." He reached out and grabbed Sam's jacket, fingers twisting in the worn leather. "You think you can just walk away? After everything?" Sam didn't move to break free from Jax's grip, but his voice came out cold and clear. "Let go." The tension crackled between them like electricity. Maggie could see the muscles in Sam's neck straining, could see the barely contained violence in both men's postures. The friendly stranger who had helped her with such patience was gone, replaced by someone who clearly knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. Jax released Sam's jacket with a sharp push. "You remember what happened to Mickey when he tried to leave?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. "How about I tell your new friend here all about it?" Sam's face went pale, and Maggie saw real fear flash across his features for the first time. Whatever had happened to Mickey, it was enough to shake even Sam's composure. The gang leader finally acknowledged Maggie's presence, turning his head to look at her with cold, calculating eyes. "Lady, you have no idea who you're dealing with here. Your friend Sam? He's got blood on his hands. More than you could imagine." Maggie felt her world tilt sideways. The man who had so carefully shown her how to hold a wrench, who had spoken so gently about her loss, suddenly seemed like a stranger. She looked at Sam, searching his face for some denial, some explanation, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Jax took another step toward Sam, his boots scraping against the asphalt. The moonlight caught the silver rings on his fingers as he clenched them into fists. His voice dropped lower, becoming a growl that made Maggie's skin crawl. "You know how this works, Sam," Jax said, his eyes dark with anger.
Nobody just walks away from us.
Maggie stood rooted to the spot, her breath coming in short gasps. The other bikers had formed a loose circle around them, their leather vests creaking as they shifted restlessly. The night air felt thick with tension, making it hard to breathe. Sam's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. His hands were steady at his sides, but Maggie could see the internal struggle playing across his face. The kind, quiet man who had helped her fix her car seemed to be wrestling with shadows from his past. "Last chance," Jax snarled, moving close enough that Sam could smell the cigarette smoke on his breath. "Come back where you belong, or this ends badly. Real badly." The pause that followed felt endless. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Sam's shoulders rise and fall with each careful breath. The bikers around them grew more restless, their boots shuffling on the pavement. Finally, Jax's patience snapped. "You're either with us, or you're dead." The words echoed in the empty night, making Maggie flinch. Sam's response was quiet but firm. "No." He took a step backward, his eyes never leaving Jax's face. "I'm done with that life." The change in Jax was immediate. His face twisted with rage, and he reached toward his jacket. Sam moved quickly, turning toward Maggie. "Get in the car," he said, his voice urgent but controlled. Maggie's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the car door handle. "You think you're helping him?" Jax called out to her, his voice dripping with mockery. "Lady, you don't know what kind of man you're dealing with. The things he's done." He let the words hang in the air. Sam was already moving toward the driver's side, his movements precise and deliberate. Maggie slid into the passenger seat, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. As Sam started the engine, Jax's final threat carried through the night air. "This isn't over, Sam. You can't run forever, and now your little friend here is part of it too." The car's engine roared to life, and Sam pressed the accelerator. The tires spun for a moment before finding purchase on the asphalt. As they pulled away, Maggie caught a glimpse of Jax in the side mirror, his face contorted with rage, illuminated by the red glow of the taillights. The sound of the engine filled the car as they sped into the darkness, leaving Jax and his gang behind. But Maggie could still feel the weight of their presence, the threat hanging over them like a storm cloud. She stole a glance at Sam, whose knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face set in grim determination. The headlights cut through the darkness as Sam pressed harder on the gas pedal. Maggie gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white, while the rumble of motorcycles grew louder behind them. The gang's headlights filled her side mirror, making her stomach churn with fear. "Hold on tight," Sam said, his voice steady despite the chaos. He took a sharp turn onto a narrow road, the tires screeching against the asphalt. Trees whipped past them in dark blurs, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers in the night. Maggie's breath came in short gasps. "Why are they after you?" she managed to ask, her voice shaking. The roar of engines seemed to be closing in from all sides now. Sam's jaw tightened as he navigated another curve. "I used to be one of them," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Hellsangels, but I left." People don't just walk away from the gang. Not in Jax's mind, anyway. "You were part of the Hells Angels?" Maggie's eyes widened in disbelief. The kind stranger who had helped her with her car seemed so different from the dangerous men pursuing them. "That was a long time ago," Sam said, swerving to avoid a pothole. "I'm not that person anymore." "But Jax," he shook his head, "he doesn't believe in second chances." The motorcycles were gaining on them. Maggie could hear their engines revving closer, the sound echoing off the trees that lined the road. In her side mirror, she caught glimpses of leather jackets and gleaming chrome, the riders hunched forward like predators closing in on their prey. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this," Sam said, his voice thick with regret. He took another sharp turn, the car's tires squealing in protest. "I never meant for anyone else to get involved." The road ahead twisted like a snake, each curve more treacherous than the last. Sam's driving grew more desperate as he tried to shake their pursuers. The car lurched from side to side, and Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs with every turn. "They're getting closer," she whispered, watching the headlights grow larger in her mirror. Sam's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His face was a mask of concentration, but Maggie could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted between the road and the rearview mirror. He was scared too, though he was trying hard not to show it. The gang split up, some taking parallel roads through the woods. Their headlights appeared between the trees like angry fireflies, keeping pace with the car. Sam cursed under his breath, realizing they were being flanked. "They're trying to box us in," he muttered, his movements becoming more erratic as he searched for an escape route. The car swerved again, narrowly missing an oncoming truck that blared its horn as it passed. Maggie squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, trying to steady her nerves. When she opened them again, the bikers were even closer. She could make out Jax's imposing figure at the head of the pack, his leather jacket gleaming in the moonlight. The chase continued through the night, their car weaving through the darkness like a hunted animal, with the relentless pursuit of the hellsangels close behind. Every mile brought new terrors, and Maggie found herself praying for the first time in years, hoping they would somehow find a way to escape the nightmare they'd stumbled into. Sam swerved the motorcycle into the dimly lit parking lot of the Sunset Motel, the neon sign flickering weakly against the night sky. The tires screeched as he brought the bike to an abrupt stop in front of room 12. Maggie held onto him tightly, her heart hammering in her chest. "Quick, inside," Sam ordered. His voice strained as he helped Maggie off the bike. The distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the empty streets, growing closer with each passing second. They rushed to the door, and Sam's hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the key. The lock finally clicked, and they hurried inside the musty room. The wallpaper was peeling, and a single bed sat beneath a window with crooked blinds. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, while a dated TV hung on the wall. "Lock the door," Sam instructed, moving to peer through the blinds. All of them. Deadbolt too. Maggie's fingers trembled as she secured the locks. The sound of motorcycles grew louder, then faded, only to grow loud again. They were circling, hunting. "They're out there," Sam muttered, his face grim. "Stay away from the windows." He winced as he moved, his hand instinctively going to his side where Jax had struck him during their earlier confrontation. "You're hurt," Maggie said, noticing how he favored his left side. A dark stain was spreading across his shirt. "Let me help. I'm fine." Sam cut her off, but his face was pale in the dim light. "Just need to figure out our next move." He paced the small room, his boots making soft thuds on the thin carpet. Maggie couldn't help but peek through a gap in the blinds. The parking lot was bathed in shadows, broken only by the occasional sweep of headlights as the bikers circled. Her stomach clenched with fear each time they passed. "Sam, they're getting closer," she whispered, watching as one of the bikes slowed near their room. The rider's head turned toward their window, and she quickly stepped back. Sam moved to the other window, his breathing slightly labored. Despite his attempts to hide it, Maggie could see the pain in his eyes and the way he held himself rigid, trying not to show weakness. "Your wound needs attention," Maggie insisted, her nurturing instincts taking over despite their dire situation. "At least let me look at it." "There's no time," Sam replied through gritted teeth. But when he tried to move quickly away from the window, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the edge of the table. The rumbling outside grew louder, then stopped completely. Voices carried through the thin walls, rough, angry voices. Maggie's heart jumped into her throat as heavy boots crunched on the gravel outside. Sam pressed himself against the wall beside the window, his face tense with concentration. "Stay back," he whispered to Maggie, who had frozen in the middle of the room, "and whatever happens, don't make a sound." The tension in the small room was suffocating. Maggie could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as footsteps approached their door. Sam's wound was clearly causing him pain, but his eyes remained alert, focused on the door as if willing it to hold against whatever was coming. The first rays of sunlight crept through the dusty motel window, painting streaks of gold across the worn carpet. Maggie sat in a faded armchair, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee from the vending machine down the hall. She hadn't slept much. Every noise during the night had made her jump, expecting to see Jax and his gang bursting through the door. Sam lay on one of the twin beds, his breathing labored. The makeshift bandage they'd fashioned from a torn shirt was stained with dried blood. His face was pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. "Sam," Maggie called softly, "you need fresh bandages." He stirred, grimacing as he tried to sit up. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Maggie's voice was firm but gentle. She'd spent enough time caring for her husband during his illness to recognize when someone was putting on a brave face. "Let me help." She retrieved the first aid kit she'd found under the bathroom sink. It wasn't much, just some gauze, medical tape, and antiseptic, but it would have to do. As she carefully peeled away the old bandage, Sam winced. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm not exactly a nurse." "You're doing fine." His voice was rough with pain. "Better than I deserve." Maggie paused, her hands hovering over his wound. "Why do you say that?" Sam's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the weight of his past written clearly in them. "The things I did with the angels, there's no coming back from that. Once you're in for life. That's how it works." "But you left," Maggie pointed out, carefully cleaning around the wound. He let out a bitter laugh that turned into a grimace. "Got you dragged into this mess too." Maggie applied fresh gauze, thinking about her own life, about the lonely months since losing her husband. "Sometimes the mess finds us whether we want it to or not." Sam was quiet for a moment. "The angels. They were my family when I had nothing else. 15 years of my life, but after what happened to Jimmy." He trailed off, pain flickering across his face that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. "Jimmy? My best friend in the gang. They killed him over a drug deal gone wrong." "Made me watch." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That's when I knew I had to get out." Maggie secured the bandage, her hands steady despite the horror of what she was hearing. "I understand loss," she said softly. "My husband, Tom, cancer took him last year. I watched him fade away, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it." "At least you were there for him," Sam said. "I couldn't even give Jimmy a proper burial." "Different kinds of helplessness," Maggie replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Different kinds of guilt." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared confessions hanging in the air. The morning sun had risen higher now, filling the room with warm light that seemed at odds with the heaviness in their hearts. "Thank you," Sam said suddenly, "for helping me, for listening." Maggie managed a small smile. Maybe we both needed someone to listen. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows through the thin motel curtains when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the room. Maggie's hand froze midway through rebandaging Sam's shoulder. Her eyes met his, wide with fear. "Sam," a gravelly voice called from outside. "We need to talk." Sam grimaced as he pushed himself up from the bed, careful not to disturb his injured shoulder. "That's Benny," he whispered to Maggie. "Jax's right-hand man." Maggie's fingers trembled as she set down the gauze. The voice outside belonged to a large man she remembered from last night. His leather vest had been covered in patches, his arms wrapped in faded tattoos. "I know you're in there," Benny called again, his tone deceptively casual. "Just want to have a friendly chat." Sam moved closer to Maggie, his voice barely audible. "Whatever happens, don't open that door, no matter what he says." The knocking came again, harder this time. The thin walls of the motel room seemed to shake with each impact. Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. The events of the past 24 hours felt surreal. How had helping a stranger fix his bike led to this? "Listen." Benny's voice dropped lower, menacing. "Jax is getting impatient. You know how he gets when he's impatient, Sam? Remember Detroit? Sam's face darkened at the mention of Detroit, his good hand clenched into a fist. We can do this, the easy way, Benny continued, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. But that woman in there with you? She doesn't need to get caught up in this. You know what I mean? Maggie felt her breath catch in her throat. The threat in his words was clear as day. I'm done with that life, Benny, Sam called back, his voice steady despite the pain evident on his face. Tell Jax to leave me be. A low chuckle came from outside. You know that's not how this works, brother. Once you're in for life. There was a pause, then the sound of boots scuffing on concrete. We'll be watching. Don't try to run, you'll just make it worse for yourself. And your new friend. Heavy footsteps retreated across the parking lot, followed by the rumble of a motorcycle engine starting up and fading into the distance. Sam immediately began gathering their few belongings, moving with renewed urgency despite his injury. We need to leave. Now. But your shoulder, Maggie protested, watching him, struggle to put on his jacket. It'll have to wait, he cut her off, though his voice was gentle. Benny showing up alone means they're planning something. We can't stay here. Maggie quickly helped Sam pack, her mind racing. The weight of their situation pressed down on her. They were running from a dangerous motorcycle gang, Sam was injured, and she was somehow in the middle of it all. Yet strangely, she felt more alive than she had in the year since losing her husband. Sam paused at the window, carefully peering through the blinds. Benny's gone, but they'll have someone watching the motel. He turned to Maggie, his expression grave. You don't have to come with me. This isn't your fight. I'm already involved, Maggie replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. We'll figure this out together. The engine roared as Sam pulled out of the motel parking lot, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Maggie sat rigid in the passenger seat, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror, where she could make out the distant shapes of motorcycles. Hold on tight, Sam warned, making a sharp turn onto a narrow side street. The tires screeched against the pavement as they weaved through the unfamiliar roads. Maggie's stomach lurched with each sudden turn. Trees and buildings blurred past her window as Sam navigated through a maze of backroads she didn't know existed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement, making it harder to see what lay ahead. We need to talk, Sam said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. He checked the mirrors again before taking another turn. You deserve to know why they're after me. Maggie nodded, her hands gripping the dashboard as they bounced over a rough patch of road. I'm listening. Sam's face was tight with concentration as he drove, but his words came out steady. I was with them for 20 years. The hellsangels became my family when I had nothing else. Jax. He paused, checking the mirrors. Again. Jax was like a brother to me. What changed? Maggie asked softly. Sam's jaw clenched. There was this kid. Couldn't have been more than 19. Got mixed up in something he shouldn't have. His voice grew thick with emotion. Jax wanted to make an example of him. I'd seen violence before, but this. He shook his head. The kid begged for his life. I can still hear his voice some nights. Maggie felt her heart ache as she watched Sam struggle with the memory. His weathered face showed pain she hadn't noticed before. I couldn't stop it, he continued, but after that night I knew I couldn't stay. You don't just walk away from the angels, though. Jax took it as a personal betrayal. They swerved onto another back road, this one lined with tall pine trees. The sound of motorcycles seemed more distant now, but the tension in Sam's shoulders didn't ease. How long have you been running? Maggie asked. 3 years, Sam replied. Changed my name, moved around. Thought I'd finally lost them until last night. He glanced at her apologetically. I never meant to drag you into this. Maggie surprised herself by reaching over and touching his arm. You're not the person you were back then, Sam. I can see that. The ghost of a smile crossed his face, but it vanished as the distant roar of motorcycles grew louder. Sam pressed harder on the accelerator, taking them deeper into the maze of back roads. They won't stop, he said grimly. Jax won't let me go. Not after what I've seen. Not after I walked away. The car bounced over another rough patch, and Maggie could see Sam wince, his earlier injuries clearly causing him pain. But his eyes remained focused on the road, determined to keep them ahead of their pursuers. The sound of motorcycles echoed through the trees again, closer this time. Sam's expression hardened as he took another sharp turn, the tires kicking up gravel. Maggie held her breath, praying they'd find a way out of this nightmare. The ting motorcycle's engine gave one final sputter before going silent. Sam coasted it into the gravel parking lot of Pete's Diner, an old building that had seen better days. The neon sign buzzed weakly in the late afternoon light, casting a pale red glow on Maggie's worried face. "We can't stay here long," Sam said, his voice tight with pain from his wounds. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the empty road behind them. Maggie nodded, following him toward the entrance. A bell chimed as they pushed through the glass door, the smell of coffee and fried food washing over them. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers hunched over their meals at the counter. "Sam?" A deep voice called from the corner booth. "That really you?" Sam tensed, instinctively stepping in front of Maggie. A broad-shouldered man with graying hair stood up, his weathered face breaking into an unexpected smile. "Tom," Sam breathed, recognition flooding his features. "I didn't know you were still around. Here." Tom approached them slowly, his hands visible in a gesture of peace. "Been running this place for about 5 years now." He glanced between Sam and Maggie, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're in trouble, aren't you?" Sam hesitated, but Maggie could see the fight leaving his shoulders. "Jax found me," he said quietly. Tom's expression darkened. "Come on, back office, both of you." They followed Tom through the kitchen and into a small office cluttered with invoices and old receipts. He closed the door behind them, offering them chairs. "Jax has been asking around," Tom said, leaning against his desk. "He's got people watching all the main roads, but I can help you lay low for a bit." "I can't ask you to get involved, Tom," Sam protested. "You got out clean." "You would have done the same for me," Tom replied simply. "Besides, I owe you for Denver." Maggie watched the exchange, seeing the years of history between these two men. Sam slowly sank into one of the chairs, exhaustion evident in every movement. "Your friend," Tom nodded toward Maggie. "She know what she's gotten into?" "She saved my life," Sam said quietly. "And now she's caught up in all this because of me." Maggie touched Sam's arm gently. "I made my own choice to help you." Tom studied them both, then nodded. "I'll make some calls. Try to buy you some time. Got a storage room upstairs where you can rest." When Tom left, silence filled the small office. Maggie could hear the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the mundane sounds a stark contrast to their situation. "You trust him?" she asked softly. Sam was quiet for a moment. "Tom's one of the good ones. He got out before things got really bad. Started fresh." He looked at her, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite read. "Like I've been trying to do." "Maybe that's what matters most," Maggie said. "Not where we've been, but where we're trying to go." Sam's hand found hers, rough and warm. "I never wanted to drag anyone else into this mess. Especially not someone like you, Maggie. Someone good. Good people can have dark pasts," she replied. "And sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to where we need to be." She thought of her husband, of all the grief she'd carried. "Maybe we're both exactly where we need to be right now." The night settled heavily around Tom's modest house on the outskirts of town. Inside, Maggie sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Sam stood by the window, his shoulders tense as he kept watch. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second feeling like an eternity. "Maybe we lost them," Maggie whispered, more to comfort herself than anything else. Sam shook his head, his expression grim. "Jax doesn't give up that easily." As if summoned by his words, the roar of motorcycles shattered the quiet night. Headlights swept across the front yard, illuminating the house in harsh white light. Sam's body went, rigid. "Back door," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. Now, Maggie's heart leaped into her throat as she scrambled to her feet. The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Heavy boots pounded against the wooden floor. "Where are you, Sam?" Jax's voice boomed through the house, dripping with malice. "Did you think Tom could hide you forever?" Sam grabbed Maggie's arm, pulling her toward the kitchen. They could hear the gang members spreading through the house, overturning furniture and slamming doors. Tom's voice rose in protest, followed by the sound of something breaking. They reached the back door just as heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Sam yanked it open, and they burst into the cool night air. Behind them, Jax's enraged shout echoed through the house. "You're dead, Sam! Both of you!" They ran across the backyard, their feet pounding against the damp grass. Maggie's lungs burned as she pushed herself to keep up with Sam. The darkness seemed to press in around them, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning from an approaching storm. The bike, Sam gasped, leading her toward where they'd hidden his motorcycle behind Tom's garage. "We need to—" A shot rang out, the sound splitting the night air. Maggie screamed as splinters exploded from the garage wall near her head. Sam shoved her behind him, his body tensing like a shield. That was a warning. Jax's voice carried across the yard. "Next one won't miss." Sam's hands fumbled with the motorcycle's ignition as Maggie climbed on behind him. The engine roared to life just as more shots rang out. Maggie wrapped her arms around Sam's waist, holding on for dear life as they tore away from the house. Through the wind rushing past her ears, she could hear the thundering pursuit of the gang's motorcycles. Jax's voice carried over the chaos, promising retribution, swearing they wouldn't escape this time. The words sent chills down her spine. Sam pushed the bike harder, taking them down dark country roads at breakneck speed. The city lights glowed in the distance, offering a beacon of hope, but the gang stayed close behind, their headlights reflecting in the bike's mirrors like pursuing demons. "Hold on tight," Sam shouted over his shoulder as they swerved onto the highway. Maggie pressed her face against his back, her heart pounding in rhythm with the motorcycle's engine. She could feel Sam's tension, knew they were running out of options. Behind them, Jax's angry threats continued to echo through the night, promising consequences that made Maggie's blood run cold. They were headed for the city now, but both of them knew the truth. There was nowhere left to hide. The motorcycle's engine groaned as Sam navigated the twisting back roads. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Blood had soaked through his shirt where the bullet had grazed him, and Maggie could see him struggling to keep the bike steady. "Sam, we need to." "Stop," Maggie said, her voice tight with worry. "You're getting worse." Sam shook his head stubbornly. "Can't stop. They'll find us." The bike swerved slightly, and Maggie's heart jumped into her throat. She wrapped her arms tighter around Sam's waist, feeling the heat radiating from his wound. Her mind raced, searching for options. They couldn't keep going like this. Sam needed help, and soon. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket. She'd been avoiding this call, but now there seemed to be no choice. At the next bend in the road, Sam pulled over, needing to rest. His breathing was labored as he leaned against a tree. Maggie's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, showing 3 bars of signal, a small mercy. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Jack's number. Her brother hadn't been part of her life much since their parents died, but she knew he'd help. He had to. The phone rang 3 times before Jack's gruff voice answered. "Maggie? It's the middle of the night." "Jack, I need your help." Her voice cracked. She glanced at Sam, who was sliding down the tree trunk, his eyes half closed. "Please." There was a pause on the other end. "What's wrong?" Maggie took a deep breath and told him everything. About Sam, the Hell's Angels, the chase, the shooting. The words tumbled out in a rush. "He's hurt, Jack. They're going to kill him if they find us." "Where are you?" Jack's voice had shifted into cop mode. All business now. Maggie described their location as best she could. Sam's eyes were on her, wary but resigned. "Listen to me carefully," Jack said. "You're in serious danger. These guys don't mess around." He paused, and Maggie could hear him moving around. "I'm calling in some favors. Stay where you are. I'm bringing help." "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. "Can you hold out that long?" Maggie looked at Sam again. His head was tilted back against the tree, but his eyes were alert, scanning the darkness around them. "We'll try. Be careful, Maggie." Jack's voice softened. "I know we haven't been close, but just stay safe until I get there." After hanging up, Maggie knelt beside Sam. His skin was clammy, but his eyes were clear when they met hers. "Your brother's a cop?" "Retired," she said. "He's coming to help." Sam nodded slowly. "Good. We need it." He tried to shift position and winced. "Maggie, thank you. Most people would have run by now." She touched his arm gently. "I'm not most people." The distant rumble of motorcycles made them both freeze. Sam struggled to stand, but Maggie pushed him back down. "You can't drive like this. We'll hide." They moved deeper into the trees, Sam leaning heavily on Maggie. The sound of engines grew louder, then faded again. Maggie held her breath, praying Jack would arrive soon. She checked her phone. 20 minutes had never felt so long. Sam's breathing was getting more labored. Maggie kept one arm around him, supporting his weight, while her other hand clutched her phone. Every sound in the darkness made her jump, but she didn't regret her choice to stay. Something told her that helping Sam was the right thing to do, no matter how dangerous it might be. The night was thick with tension as red and blue lights pierced the darkness. Police cars surrounded the abandoned warehouse where Jax and his gang had cornered Maggie and Sam. The air crackled with nervous energy as officers crouched behind their vehicles, weapons drawn. Maggie's heart pounded against her ribs as she watched from behind a police cruiser. Her brother Jack stood next to her, his face grim with determination. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice firm but gentle. Inside the warehouse, Sam faced down Jax and the remaining gang members. His shoulder wound throbbed, but he stood tall, refusing to show weakness. The moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting strange shadows across the concrete floor. "It ends tonight, Jax," Sam called, out, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Let it go." Jax's laugh was cold and hollow. "You think these cops can save you? You're still one of us, Sam. Always will be." He took a menacing step forward, his leather jacket creaking in the silence. Outside, a police negotiator spoke through a megaphone. "This is your last warning. Come out with your hands up." Maggie watched as more police units arrived, their tires crunching on gravel. Her fingers gripped the cold metal of the cruiser door until her knuckles turned white. The past few days felt like a lifetime, and now everything was coming to a head. The tension snapped like a rubber band. A shot rang out from inside the warehouse, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Officers surged forward, shouting commands. More gunshots echoed through the night air. "Sam!" Maggie screamed, trying to move forward, but Jack held her back. Through the chaos, she could see figures moving in the warehouse. The police breached the entrance, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. More shots were fired, and someone yelled in pain. Maggie's world narrowed to a single point when she saw Sam stagger backward, clutching his side. He'd been hit. But even wounded, he remained standing, facing down Jack's one last time. The police closed in from all sides. Jax, realizing he was trapped, raised his gun toward Sam. Two officers fired simultaneously, and Jax fell, his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. "Drop your weapons! On the ground, now!" Officers shouted as they surrounded the remaining gang members. One by one, they surrendered, throwing down their guns and kneeling with their hands behind their heads. Sam slumped against a wall, blood seeping between his fingers where he pressed against his wound. Maggie broke free from Jack's grip and ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Sam, hold on, please, hold on," she begged, pressing her hands over his to help stop the bleeding. The warehouse filled with officers, securing the scene. They led the gang members out in handcuffs, Jack's among them, his face twisted with rage and defeat. The Hells Angels' grip on Sam was finally broken. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, gently moving Maggie aside to tend to Sam. His eyes found hers as they worked, and despite the pain, he managed a small smile. "It's over," he whispered. Maggie watched as they loaded Sam into an ambulance, her brother's steadying hand on her shoulder. Around them, police officers processed the scene, collecting weapons and evidence. The night air was still charged with adrenaline, but the immediate danger had passed. The flashing lights continued to paint the scene in alternating red and blue as officers led the last of the gang members to waiting patrol cars. The Hells Angels' reign of terror was ending, not with the roar of motorcycles, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the small room as Maggie sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair beside Sam's bed. Sunlight streamed through the window blinds, creating strips of light across the white hospital sheets. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on Sam's sleeping form. The past few days felt like a blur. The gunfire, the screaming, the sight of Sam falling. Now, in the quiet of the hospital room, it all seemed surreal. The doctors had assured her that Sam would recover, but seeing him lying there, wrapped in bandages, made her heart ache. Sam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Maggie?" His voice was hoarse. "I'm here," she said, leaning forward. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck." He managed a weak smile. "You didn't have to stay." "Of course I did." Maggie adjusted his pillow. "Besides, where else would I be?" Sam's face grew serious. "The gang. Are they?" "They're all in custody," Maggie assured him. "My brother made sure of that. Jax and the others won't be bothering you anymore." Relief washed over Sam's features. But there was something else there, too. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. "I've spent so long running," he said quietly. "I don't know how to stop." Maggie understood that feeling all too well. Since losing her husband, she'd been running too, not from people, but from life itself. "I know what you mean," she admitted. "After Tom died, I just existed. I didn't know how to move forward." Sam turned his head to look at her properly. "How did you cope?" "I'm still learning," she said honestly. "But I think maybe we're not supposed to know exactly where we're going. Maybe it's okay to just take it one day at a time." A nurse came in to check Sam's vitals, interrupting their conversation. When she left, Sam spoke again, his voice stronger. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Maggie. Things that'll stay with me forever. We all have regrets," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we can't change. I want to." Sam admitted. For the first time in years, I actually want to try. He paused, struggling with his words. When I was lying there, after being shot, I realized something. I've been so focused on running from my past that I never thought about running towards something better. Maggie reached out and squeezed his hand. It's never too late to start over. Even for someone like me? Especially for someone like you. She smiled gently. You know, when my car broke down that night, I thought it was just another bad thing in a long line of bad things. I never imagined that you'd end up in the middle of a biker gang showdown? Sam attempted a chuckle, then winced. That I'd find someone who understands what it's like to be lost. She corrected him. Someone who needs to find their way just as much as I do. Sam was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. I don't know how to live a normal life anymore, he confessed. The gang. It was all I knew for so long. Then we'll figure it out together, Maggie said firmly. One day at a time, remember? The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow in the hospital waiting room. Maggie shifted in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The events of the past few days played through her mind like scenes from a movie she could hardly believe she'd starred in. The quiet beeping of medical equipment and the soft murmur of nurses at their station created a strange backdrop to her tumultuous thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the window, where morning light was just beginning to streak across the sky. She hadn't slept much. Couldn't really. Not with everything weighing so heavily on her mind. The image of Sam getting shot, the chaos of the police standoff, the final moments when Jax and his gang were arrested, it all swirled together in a dizzying mix of fear and relief. Mrs. Thompson? A nurse's gentle voice pulled her from her thoughts. Mr. Walker is awake if you'd like to see him. Maggie nodded, gathering her cardigan around her shoulders as she followed the nurse down the sterile hallway. Her steps echoed against the linoleum floor, each one carrying her closer to Sam's room. She paused at his door, taking a deep breath before entering. Sam lay propped up in the hospital bed, his usual tough exterior softened by the white hospital gown and the bandages visible beneath it. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there she hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability, mixed with a hint of hope. "You're still here," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Of course I am." Maggie settled into the chair beside his bed. "Someone needs to make sure you don't try to escape before the doctors clear you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, but it faded quickly. "You don't have to stay, Maggie. You've done more than enough already." "I want to be here," she said firmly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Just days ago, she'd been trapped in her own world of grief, going through the motions of life without really living it. Now, something had shifted inside her. Sam's gaze dropped to his hands. "I never meant to drag you into all this. My past. It's not something anyone else should have had to deal with." "Maybe that's true," Maggie said softly, "but dealing with it is exactly what helped me wake up." She leaned forward in her chair. "For the past year, I've been stuck. After losing David, I just existed. But these past few days, as terrifying as they were, made me realize I'm stronger than I thought." Sam looked at her then, really looked at her, and Maggie could see the weight of his past in his eyes. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he admitted. "Things I can never take back. We all have regrets, Sam. The question is, what do we do with them?" The morning sun had risen higher now, streaming through the window and warming the sterile room. Sam shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "I don't know if I can ever really leave it all behind." "Maybe you don't have to leave it all behind," Maggie said thoughtfully. "Maybe you just have to learn to carry it differently." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the gentle hum of hospital machinery and distant voices in the hallway. They were both at crossroads, Maggie realized. She with her grief, he with his past. But somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, they'd found a kind of understanding in each other's broken pieces. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. Maggie paused in the doorway of Sam's room, taking in the sight of him. He sat in a chair by the window, his leather jacket draped over the back, staring out at the distant horizon. The bruises on his face had faded to yellowish marks, but the heaviness in his shoulders spoke of wounds that went much deeper. "Ready to get out of here?" Maggie asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Sam turned, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "More than ready. These walls are starting to close in on me." Maggie moved into the room, noticing how Sam's few belongings were already packed in a small duffel bag. The nurses had left his discharge papers on the bed, all signed and ready. A week had passed since the showdown with the hellsangels, but the memory still felt fresh. "The doctor says you're healing well," Maggie said, picking up the bag. "Though you'll need to take it easy for a while." Sam stood slowly, wincing slightly. "Taking it easy was never my strong suit." His voice was gruff, but held a warmth that hadn't been there when they first met. As they walked through the hospital corridors, their footsteps echoing off the walls, Maggie felt an odd sense of peace wash over her. The fear that had gripped her during those chaotic days was gone, replaced by something stronger. She wasn't the same person who had been stranded on that dark road a week ago. They reached the hospital entrance, and Sam stopped, turning to face her. The morning light caught the doll, silver in his hair, making him look older, more vulnerable. "I can't stay here," he said quietly. "Small towns have long memories, and mine, well, it's got too many dark chapters." Maggie nodded, understanding. "Where will you go?" "West, maybe. Somewhere new. Somewhere I can start fresh." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You know, when I first saw you on that road, I thought you were just another person who needed help. Turns out, you ended up helping me more than I could have imagined." "We helped each other," Maggie replied, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Sometimes the best healing comes from unexpected places." Sam reached out and squeezed her hand. "You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it all. Made me believe that maybe I'm not beyond saving after all." The morning traffic hummed in the background as they stood there. Two broken people who had somehow found strength in each other's company. A taxi pulled up to the curb, waiting to take Sam to wherever his new path would lead. "Thank you," he said simply, picking up his bag. The words held the weight of everything they'd been through together. Maggie watched as he walked toward the taxi, his steps steady despite his injuries. He turned one last time, giving her a small nod before getting in. As the taxi pulled away, Maggie felt not sadness, but a quiet certainty. They had both found what they needed in those dangerous days, not an ending, but a beginning. The autumn breeze rustled through the farmer's market, carrying the sweet scent of fresh apples and warm bread. Maggie adjusted her wool scarf as she meandered between the colorful stalls, pausing to admire bunches of late-season flowers and pyramids of bright orange pumpkins. The market buzzed with life, children darting between stands, elderly couples walking arm in arm, vendors calling out their daily specials. "These peaches are the last of the season, mister," Thompson, the fruit vendor, said as Maggie examined his produce. "Sweet as honey. I promise you that." Maggie smiled, running her thumb over the fuzzy skin of a peach. "I'll take 4, please. They'll be perfect for." The words caught in her throat as her eyes landed on a familiar figure across the market. Sam stood near the bakery stand, his leather jacket replaced by a simple denim one. He was talking to another man, both of them laughing at something Maggie couldn't hear. The change in him was striking. His shoulders, once perpetually tense, were relaxed. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes was gone, replaced by genuine warmth as he spoke with his companion. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she paid Mr. Thompson. She hesitated, uncertainty creeping in. Should she approach him? Would he want to be reminded of that terrifying night? Before she could decide, Sam's gaze swept across the market and found her. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a broad smile that transformed his entire appearance. He said something to his friend and started walking toward her. "Maggie," he said, his voice warm and steady. "It's good to see you." "Sam," she replied, surprised by how natural it felt to say his name. "You look different," he chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Feel different, too." He gestured to the man he'd been talking to, who was now approaching them. "This is John. We work together at Carter's auto shop over in Madison." John extended his hand, his grip firm and friendly. "So you're the famous Maggie. Sam's told me about what happened." "You've got guts, ma'am." Maggie felt her cheeks warm. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Sam said quietly. "You showed me kindness when you had every reason not to." He shifted his weight, looking more settled in his skin than Maggie had ever seen him. "The shop's good work. Honest work. John here gave me a chance when most wouldn't." "We all deserve second chances," John said, clapping Sam on the shoulder. "I'll let you two catch up. Nice meeting you, Maggie." As John walked away, Maggie noticed the peace in Sam's expression. "You seem happy," she observed. "Getting there." Sam nodded. "One day at a time. What about you? How have you been?" "I'm doing better," Maggie said, realizing as she spoke just how true it was. "I've started volunteering at the church again, leading the food drive committee. It feels good to be helping people again." "That suits you," Sam said softly. "You've got a way of seeing the good in people, even when they can't see it themselves." Maggie stood in the church kitchen, arranging her homemade apple pie on the counter alongside other desserts. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the checkered tablecloth for the third time. Through the window, she could see cars pulling into the parking lot for the monthly potluck dinner. "Need any help with that?" Martha, one of the regular volunteers, asked. "No, I'm fine," Maggie replied, though her voice wavered. She hadn't told anyone that she'd invited Sam. After their chance meeting at the farmer's market, something had shifted. The man she'd met that dangerous night months ago had transformed into someone new, someone seeking connection just as much as she was. The familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine made her look up. Through the window, she watched Sam park his bike. He'd traded his worn leather jacket for a clean, button-down shirt, and even from this distance, she could see he'd made an effort to look presentable. Maggie told Martha, wiping her hands on her apron. She hurried to meet Sam at the church entrance. "You came," she said, unable to hide her smile. Sam shifted his weight, holding a covered dish. "Brought my mom's old chili recipe. Haven't made it in years, but—" He shrugged, attempting to appear casual despite his obvious nervousness. Inside, the fellowship hall buzzed with conversation and laughter. Maggie noticed several people glance their way, but their looks were curious rather than judgmental. Sam set his chili on the long buffet table, and Maggie introduced him to Martha and a few other regular church members. "So you're the mechanic, Sam, we've been hearing about," Martha said warmly. "Maggie mentioned you helped her that night. Her car broke down." Sam's eyes met Maggie's briefly. They'd agreed to keep the full story of their meeting private, sharing only the simplest version. "Yes, ma'am, though truth is, she helped me just as much." As the evening progressed, Maggie watched Sam gradually relax. He spoke with elderly Mr. Johnson about motorcycles, helped young Tommy reach the high shelf for extra napkins, and even laughed at Pastor Mike's terrible jokes. The tension in his shoulders eased, and his smile became more natural. After dinner, they stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. They sat on a wooden bench near the church garden, where late summer roses still bloomed. "Thank you for inviting me," Sam said, quietly. "I haven't felt this, normal, in a long time." Maggie nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Sometimes the simplest moments are the most healing. You know," Sam continued, watching the sunset, "I spent so many years running from who I was, thinking I could never escape it. But being here tonight," he gestured to the church, to the people still chatting inside, "it reminds me that maybe I don't have to run anymore. Maybe I can just be who I am now." Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. "I understand that feeling. After losing Tom, I thought I'd never find my way back to anything meaningful. But sometimes, life surprises you." They shared a smile, both recognizing how far they'd come from that dark night on the lonely road. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had expected, a bond forged through danger, but strengthened by understanding and acceptance. The morning sunlight streamed through the cafe's front windows, casting warm patches across the worn wooden floors. Maggie pushed open the door, and the familiar bell chimed above her head. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. "Good morning, Maggie," Sarah, the barista, called out with a cheerful wave. "The usual today?" "Yes, please." Maggie smiled, fishing her wallet from her purse. "And maybe one of those blueberry muffins, too." She watched as Sarah worked the espresso machine with practiced ease. The cafe had become her sanctuary over the past few months, a place where she could think, read, or simply be. The soft chatter of other customers and the gentle hiss of the coffee machine created a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. Taking her coffee and muffin to her favorite corner table, Maggie settled into the cushioned chair. She'd barely taken her first sip when her phone buzzed against the table. Her heart lifted when she saw Sam's name on the screen. The message was simple, but it made her smile. "Finally got the keys to my new place. No more city life for me. The shop offered me full-time work, starting Monday." Maggie's fingers hovered over the phone as she composed her reply. She thought about how far Sam had come since that night on the dark road. Each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory worth celebrating. When Sam walked into the cafe an hour later, Maggie noticed the change in him immediately. His shoulders were relaxed, his stride confident but not defensive. Gone was the wary look that used to cloud his eyes. He ordered a black coffee and joined her at the table. "The apartment's small," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "But it's mine. Clean slate, you know?" Maggie nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "How's the work at the shop?" "Good. Really good." Sam's face lit up. "Been saving up for my own bike. A proper one this time. Nothing flashy. Just something reliable." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I've been seeing someone too. A therapist, I mean." The admission seemed to cost him something, but he held his head high. "Figure it's time to deal with everything. Can't run forever, right?" "That's wonderful, Sam," Maggie said softly, meaning every word. "What about you?" he asked. "You mentioned you were thinking about making some changes?" Maggie straightened in her chair, feeling a flutter of excitement. "I'm going back to school," she announced, "to finish my nursing degree. I put it on hold when—" she swallowed hard. "When Tom got sick, but I think it's time." Sam reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. "You'll be great at it." "I hope so," she said. "It feels right, you know? Like I'm finally moving forward, instead of just existing." The cafe bustled around them as they talked, sharing their hopes and plans. Sam spoke about wanting to make amends, about reconnecting with people he'd wronged in the past. Maggie listened, touched by his determination to face his demons head-on. "It's not easy," he admitted, Learning to trust people again. Learning to trust myself. But I'm getting there. Maggie stood in her kitchen, sorting through her mail with a cup of tea, warming her hands. Bills, advertisements, and then something different. A cream-colored envelope with elegant script caught her eye. Inside was an invitation to the annual Hope Springs Foundation fundraiser, an event supporting cancer research and patient care. Her chest tightened as she read the details. The foundation had been close to her heart since her husband's diagnosis, but she hadn't attended any events since his passing. The thought of going alone made her stomach knot. She placed the invitation on her counter, intending to let it collect dust like so many others before it. But as she turned away, her eyes fell on a small wrench sitting on her windowsill, a reminder of that fateful night with Sam. She thought about how he was facing his fears head-on, rebuilding his life piece by piece. If Sam can start over, she whispered to herself, so can I. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and RSVP'd yes. The evening of the fundraiser arrived crisp and clear. The community center had been transformed, with twinkling lights and elegant decorations. Maggie smoothed her navy blue dress, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The familiar faces of her community greeted her warmly. She found herself drawn into conversations, surprised by how natural it felt to be there. Sarah, her friend from church choir, approached with a gentle smile. "Maggie, it's wonderful to see you here," Sarah said, touching her arm. "You seem different somehow." "Lighter." Maggie tilted her head, considering. "I suppose I am different. These past few months have taught me a lot about strength I didn't know I had." "Your husband would be proud," Sarah said softly. "We've all noticed the change in you since everything that happened. You're more present, more engaged. It's like you've found yourself again." A movement near the entrance caught Maggie's eye. Sam stood there, looking almost unrecognizable in a well-fitted charcoal suit. His usual leather jacket was nowhere to be seen, and his hair was neatly combed. But what struck her most was his posture, confident, yet humble. He carried himself like a man who had made peace with his past. Their eyes met across the room, and Sam's face broke into a warm smile. He made his way through the crowd to her side. "You clean up nice?" Maggie said, grinning. Sam tugged at his tie self-consciously. "The suit's borrowed, but I figured it was time I learned how to wear one properly." They found a quiet corner near the window, where the stars were visible through the glass. Sam told her about his progress at the mechanic shop, how he'd been promoted to lead mechanic. Maggie shared her excitement about starting nursing classes in the fall. "Did you ever think," Sam asked, "that night on the road, that we'd end up here?" Maggie shook her head, watching the party unfold before them. "I was just trying to survive that night, but now—" She paused, considering her words carefully. "Now, I'm learning how to live again." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood together, watching their community celebrate life and hope, both aware of how far they'd come from that dark night on a lonely road. The setting sun cast long shadows across the park as Maggie and Sam stood at the water's edge. The lake stretched before them like glass, reflecting the cotton candy colors of the evening sky. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sweet scent of late summer flowers. Maggie watched a family of ducks glide across the water, their ripples disturbing the mirror-like surface. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, comfortable in the peaceful silence she and Sam now shared. It was different from that first night they'd met, when silence had been heavy with fear and uncertainty. "Hard to believe it's been 6 months, Sam said, his voice carrying the warmth it had gained since settling into town. He looked different now, his shoulders were relaxed, and the constant tension that had marked his features had softened. His leather jacket was replaced with a simple denim one, and his eyes held a clarity that spoke of inner peace. "The shop's doing well?" Maggie asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd seen the pride in his face whenever he talked about his work at the mechanics. Sam nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Got promoted to head mechanic last week. Owners talking about partnership down the line." He paused, kicking a small stone into the water. "Never thought I'd have something like this. You know, a real future." They began walking along the lakeside path, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. The park was quiet at this hour, with just a few joggers and dog walkers passing by. Each one nodded hello. Sam was no longer a stranger to them, but a familiar face in their small community. "How's the nursing program?" Sam asked, genuine interest in his voice. Maggie's face lit up. "Challenging, but in the best way. Had my first practical exam yesterday." She laughed softly. "My hands were shaking so bad trying to take blood pressure readings, but I passed." "Of course you did," Sam said with certainty. "You're stronger than you think, Maggie. Always have been." They reached a wooden bench overlooking the lake and sat down. The evening light painted everything in soft gold, making the moment feel somehow suspended in time. "You know," Maggie said, watching a pair of swans drift by, "I used to come here all the time after Thomas passed, just sit and wonder if I'd ever feel whole again." She turned to look at Sam. "I never imagined that helping a stranger fix his bike would change everything." Sam's expression grew thoughtful. "That night, I was running away. Again. Had been for years." He shook his head. "But something made me stop when I saw your car. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe we both just needed someone to remind us that we weren't lost causes." Maggie replied softly. The breeze picked up, carrying the distant sound of children playing in the park. Sam watched a leaf spiral down from a nearby maple tree, landing gently on the lake's surface. "The guys at the shop asked me to join their bowling league," he said with a slight chuckle. "Me, bowling on Thursday nights. Who would have thought?" Maggie smiled, remembering the man she'd met that night on the dark road, how far he'd come from the weight of his past with the hellsangels. "Life has a funny way of surprising us," she said. The evening breeze rustled through the maple trees lining Maggie's front yard, carrying with it the sweet scent of late summer flowers. She sat in her favorite wicker chair on the porch, warming her hands around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across her well-tended garden. From her vantage point, she could see most of the small town sprawled below, the church steeple rising above the trees. The main street, with its row of familiar shops, and the park where children still played as their parents called them home for dinner. It was the same view she'd had for years, yet somehow everything looked different now. Maggie took a slow sip of her tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Her thoughts drifted to that night on the dark country road when her car had broken down and a stranger on a motorcycle had stopped to help. She smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been at first. Who could have known that moment would change everything? The past year had reshaped her in ways she never expected. Before Sam rode into her life, she'd been existing rather than living, wrapped in the cocoon of her grief. Her husband's death had left her, adrift, and she'd convinced herself that was all there was left for her, to be the widow, the one left behind. Setting her cup down on the small table beside her chair, Maggie touched the locket around her neck, the one containing her late husband's photo. For the first time in a long while, the gesture didn't bring that sharp stab of pain. Instead, she felt a gentle warmth, a fondness for the memories they'd shared. The adventure with Sam had awakened something in her she thought was long dead: courage, strength, the ability to face uncertainty head-on. She'd helped a man escape his past, stood up to dangerous people, and in doing so, found her own voice again. Maggie glanced at her nursing textbooks stacked on the porch swing, their pages marked with colorful sticky notes. At 62, she was the oldest student in her class, but that didn't matter anymore. The young students had welcomed her, and she found herself sharing her life experiences with them during study sessions. A motorcycle rumbled in the distance, and Maggie's lips curved into a smile. It wasn't Sam. He was working late at the garage tonight, but the sound no longer made her nervous. Instead, it reminded her of transformation, of how life could surprise you when you least expected it. She wasn't the same woman who had sat in her broken-down car that night, feeling invisible and forgotten. That woman couldn't imagine standing up to a gang of bikers, or going back to school, or finding her voice in community meetings. That woman didn't know her own strength. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, and Maggie watched as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Her tea had grown cold, but she hardly noticed. She was too busy marveling at how life had led her here, to this moment of peace and possibility. Sam had found his own peace, too. She'd seen it in his eyes just yesterday when he'd stopped by to help her with her garden. Gone was the haunted look, the constant checking over, and his shoulder. He walked taller now, smiled more easily, spoke of future plans without hesitation. Their friendship had grown into something precious and unexpected, a bond forged in danger but sustained by mutual understanding and respect. They were two people who had lost their way but found themselves again, partly through helping each other.